Millionaire found his black adoptive mother after 30 years in a nursing home while making a donation. Marcus Hale had built his life on control. Every deal calculated, every risk measured, every success hard-earned. At 36, he was the kind of man newspapers called self-made. The skyline of Ridgeview City bore his name in steel and glass. The Hale Construction logo shining from rooftops he had once only dreamed of touching. To his board, he was a visionary. To investors, a guarantee. To the public, a symbol of progress. Yet beneath that polished success was a man who lived with a quiet, unspoken distance. From others, from emotion, from the fragments of a childhood he never dared to revisit. His mornings began the same way. The alarm before dawn, the cold shower, the black coffee with no sugar, the endless stream of numbers and meetings. Marcus lived in motion, as if standing still would let something catch up to him. People often said his discipline bordered on obsession. He preferred to think of it as survival. He rarely spoke of his childhood. What little he shared was the official version. Adopted young, raised by Arthur and Elaine Hale, educated at elite schools, determined to prove himself worthy of the life they had given him. But behind that neat biography was something more fragmented. Flashes of laughter in a kitchen he didn't recognize, a woman's voice humming softly at night, and a promise he could never place but always felt he'd broken. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share a word of love in the comments. The donation to Silver Oaks Care Center wasn't meant to be personal. It was another item on his philanthropic calendar, an $800,000 contribution toward the city's elder care initiative, a gesture that would earn a headline and a photograph with a ribbon cutting. He didn't expect to feel anything. His assistant, Aaron, had arranged the meeting, and the documents were already prepared. All Marcus had to do was show up, sign the check, and move on to his next meeting downtown. Silver Oaks sat on the city's edge, where manicured streets faded into older, forgotten neighborhoods. The building itself looked tired, a relic of the 70s with peeling paint and an overgrown courtyard that hadn't seen laughter in years. Yet when Marcus stepped through the doors, he felt something he couldn't name. A chill, maybe, or a kind of stillness that didn't belong. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and loneliness. Wheelchairs lined the hallway like silent witnesses. The head nurse, Nancy Cole, greeted him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She spoke fast, rehearsed, clearly eager to get through the visit. Marcus nodded politely, pretending not to notice the tremor in her voice or the way her eyes darted to the corners whenever a door creaked open. He moved through the facility with detached curiosity, checking the condition of the rooms, asking standard questions about patient care and staffing. It was routine, yet something in the atmosphere felt off. Too quiet, too controlled. When a muffled voice echoed from a nearby corridor, Nancy's expression tightened. "One of our more difficult residents," she said quickly, waving a hand as if to erase the sound. But the tone of the voice caught Marcus's attention. It wasn't the words, just the way they were spoken. Warm, pleading, familiar in a way that scraped at some buried part of him. He brushed it off at first, continuing the tour. Still, the unease lingered. It wasn't just the facility's decay or the nurse's clipped politeness. It was something beneath the surface, something unspoken. He'd learned in business that instincts rarely lied, and he was now whispering that something here was terribly wrong. Marcus paused by a window overlooking the courtyard. Outside, an old woman sat alone on a bench, her frail hands folded in her lap. Her skin was deep brown, her silver hair tied back neatly. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass. Hers widened with something that looked like recognition or hope. Then a young orderly appeared, guiding her back inside. Marcus almost called out, but Nancy's voice broke his focus. "Mr. Hale, if you follow me, the director is ready for you." He turned away, shaking off the feeling. It wasn't his place to get involved. He was here to donate, not to inspect patients. Yet as he walked down the corridor, The echo of that woman's gaze followed him like a question he didn't know how to answer. The signing ceremony was brief. Cameras clicked, officials shook his hand, and speeches were made about generosity and community responsibility. Marcus smiled for the photographs, the perfect image of corporate philanthropy. But as soon as the last flash went off, he felt an odd heaviness. He couldn't stop thinking about that woman outside. The way she'd looked at him, almost pleading, almost certain. On his way out, he caught another glimpse of her. This time, she was being pulled down the hallway by the same nurse who had greeted him. The old woman struggled weakly, trying to say something. Marcus couldn't hear the words, but her lips moved around a single name. It was enough to stop him in his tracks. A faint tremor ran through him. He tried to dismiss it, to focus on the schedule ahead. But deep inside, a door had opened, one that had been locked for decades. The polished world he'd built for himself suddenly felt fragile, like glass stretched too thin. Something in that nursing home had reached into the part of his life he thought he'd buried forever. He didn't know it yet, but the donation he made that morning would become the price of truth. And the truth waiting for him inside those sterile walls would shatter everything he believed about his family, his success, and the life he thought he'd earned. Marcus couldn't shake the image of that frail woman being dragged down the corridor. All through his drive back to the office, her face lingered in his mind. Those searching eyes, that desperate look of recognition. The logical part of him tried to dismiss it. He told himself she was just another patient, confused, maybe delusional. But reason couldn't quiet the unease building inside him. By the time he reached his penthouse office overlooking Ridgeview City, he already knew he wasn't done with Silver Oaks. He called Aaron, his assistant, and asked for a background check on the facility. He didn't bother explaining why. Aaron had worked for him long enough to recognize the tone in Marcus's voice, the tone that meant find everything. Within hours, preliminary reports started coming in. Silver Oaks wasn't what it appeared to be. Financial records showed inconsistencies, inflated operational costs, unreported donations, and private transfers routed through shell foundations. None of it made sense for a small care home. And at the center of it all was the head nurse, Nancy Cole. That night, Marcus barely slept. He sat in his apartment surrounded by spreadsheets and legal filings, the city lights reflecting off glass walls like silent witnesses. He zoomed in on a scanned document Aaron had sent, a list of residents. One name stopped him cold, Evelyn Brooks, the same woman he'd seen that morning. He read the intake notes. Admitted 23 years ago, history of delusions, claims to have a son named Marcus. The words seemed to echo off the screen. His chest tightened. Couldn't be a coincidence. Somewhere deep inside, his memory stirred warm hands tying his shoes, the scent of oatmeal cookies. A lullaby hummed softly under a ceiling fan. The woman in that memory had the same gentle eyes, the same voice. He closed his eyes and let the recollection wash over him until it became unbearable. The next morning, he was back at Silver Oaks. The staff looked startled to see him. Nancy tried to steer him toward her office, but Marcus brushed past her, demanding to see Evelyn. Her excuses crumbled when he invoked his authority as the facility's largest donor. In a dim room at the end of the corridor, he found Evelyn sitting by a window, motionless, her head bowed. For a moment, she didn't respond when he spoke. Then her trembling hands lifted, and her eyes found him. Something flickered, recognition, disbelief, love, all tangled together. Nancy's voice cut through the moment, sharp and defensive. "She gets confused," she said. "She tells everyone she has a rich son. You can't take it seriously." Marcus turned to face her, his expression unreadable. He didn't argue. He simply left the room, but his silence was louder than any accusation. That evening, Aaron dug deeper. He found offshore deposits, $4,000 a month, wired to Nancy Cole from a law firm called Sinclair and Associates. The firm had once specialized in private adoptions and discreet guardianships for wealthy families. One of their clients decades ago had been Arthur and Elaine Hale, Marcus's adoptive parents. The pieces began to fit, but the picture they formed was something monstrous. Evelyn hadn't been a random patient. She'd been erased, hidden away by the very people who had raised him. Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him. He'd built his empire believing in merit and fairness, but now he saw the rot beneath it all, the quiet, invisible cruelty that protected power. He hired an independent neurologist, Dr. Elena Park, to evaluate Evelyn privately. What she found confirmed his worst suspicions. Evelyn didn't have dementia. She had been over-medicated for years, intentionally sedated. Her medical records were a web of lies. False diagnoses, forged signatures, altered test results. When Dr. Park showed Marcus the pattern of drugs used to keep patients docile, he felt a sick fury twist in his stomach. Then came the final blow. Old financial ledgers from Sinclair and Associates revealed that Evelyn's confinement had been funded through the Hale Family Trust, his family's trust. His adoptive parents had paid to have her institutionalized, signing her away under the claim that she was mentally unstable. She had been his caregiver, the woman who raised him, loved him, and was taken from him so that his adoptive family could erase her existence and claim him as their own. Marcus stared at the documents spread across his desk, each page another nail in the coffin of the life he thought he knew. Rage coursed through him, but it wasn't the loud kind. It was cold, methodical. He wasn't the little boy who had lost his mother. He was the man who had the means to expose them all. He brought the evidence to Samuel Ortiz, a trusted attorney known for taking on institutional corruption, and state prosecutor Laura Bennett, whose record in human rights cases was impeccable. Together, they began tracing connections. Families, clinics, lawyers, doctors. What they uncovered went far beyond Evelyn Brooks. It was a system. For decades, wealthy families had paid networks of professionals to silence poor black and brown caregivers, labeling them unfit and disappearing them into psychiatric facilities. In exchange, those families obtained children, legally, cleanly, with falsified paperwork that made the adoptions untouchable. The deeper Marcus went, the darker it became. He reviewed case after case. Women who had simply vanished. Children whose identities had been rewritten. Evelyn's story was only one of many. Some victims had died forgotten. Others were still locked away, over-medicated and nameless. The realization hollowed him out. His wealth, his status, even his identity, all of it was built atop the suffering of people like her. Every new revelation was a knife. Each connection added another layer to his guilt and determination. He knew he couldn't undo what had been done, but he could make sure it never happened again. And that meant bringing everyone involved into the light, no matter who they were. He started planning quietly. The prosecutor's office needed evidence airtight enough for federal warrants. Marcus funded surveillance, hired digital forensics experts, and mapped the network's entire chain, from forged medical records to bank transfers. He didn't tell his parents. Not yet. He wanted them to see the truth unfold publicly, just as they had once erased someone's life in silence. The night before the operation, Marcus stood on his penthouse balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly below. He thought about Evelyn. Alone in that care home for 23 years, waiting for a son who never came. The guilt burned like acid. He had spent a lifetime proving himself to people who had stolen everything that made him human. Tomorrow that will end. As dawn approached, federal agents prepared to move. 20 coordinated raids were set to hit clinics, law firms, and private homes across Ridgeview County. Marcus would watch it all unfold from the U.S. Attorney's command room. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just about justice, it was about redemption. And as the sun rose over Ridgeview City, one thought echoed in his mind. They buried the truth for 30 years. Now, he was going to dig it up, no matter who got buried next. The morning of the raids began like any other in Ridgeview City. Commuters, headlines, the hum of routine. But in a quiet command room on the 12th floor of the U.S. Attorney's office, Marcus Hale stood surrounded by monitors streaming live feeds from 20 different locations. He wore a dark suit, his face set in a calm that didn't match the storm inside him. Around him, agents moved with clipped precision, radios crackling as the countdown began. Operation Clean Veil Go. At exactly 7 a.m., the city erupted. SWAT teams swept into private clinics, shuttered psychiatric wards, and the marble offices of Sinclair and Associates. Doors splintered. Computers were seized. Shocked executives and doctors in lab coats were escorted out in handcuffs. In one feed, Marcus saw Nancy Cole, the head nurse from Silver Oaks, shouting as federal officers led her away. Her voice was lost beneath the noise, but he didn't need to hear it. For 23 years, she had profited from silence. That silence had finally been broken. He watched in real time as agents entered the Hale estate, the mansion where he'd spent his teenage years pretending he belonged. Arthur Hale stood rigid, his expression a mask of disbelief as agents handed him the warrant. Elaine Hale trembled beside him, clutching the railing like it might keep her world from collapsing. Marcus didn't look away. He owed himself that much. When Arthur finally spotted the camera feed and realized his son was watching, his expression hardened. Not in shame, but in defiance. That was who Arthur had always been. A man who believed his money could buy morality, who'd built his empire on the illusion of respectability. As agents led him away, the illusion shattered. Marcus should have felt satisfaction. Instead, all he felt was cold. This wasn't triumph. It was exposure, the rot of an entire system laid bare. Hours later, as evidence streamed in, files, ledgers, sealed records, Marcus drove back to Silver Oaks. He needed to see Evelyn. I needed to tell her it was over. But when he arrived, the facility was in chaos. Investigators filled the halls, nurses whispered, residents huddled in corners, unsure of what was happening. He found Evelyn in her room, sitting upright, her eyes clearer than he'd ever seen them. When he entered, she looked up and smiled faintly, as if she'd been expecting him. For a moment, the noise outside faded. Marcus felt the air shift, the sterile walls, the antiseptic smell. All of it seemed to dissolve until there was only her, the woman who had once sung him to sleep. He knelt beside her. There were no words for what he felt. Guilt, relief, grief, all tangled together. He wanted to apologize for not finding her sooner, for believing the lies that erased her, for becoming the kind of man who could live comfortably while she was buried alive in that place. But Evelyn simply placed a trembling hand on his face and whispered something barely audible, something that sounded like forgiveness. It broke him. For the first time in years, Marcus let himself cry. Not in silence or restraint, but openly, the way a child cries when the truth becomes too heavy to bear. Outside, the investigation widened. Prosecutor Laura Bennett stood before the press, outlining the operation. A criminal network spanning 4 decades, built on racial exploitation disguised as law. Every word was devastating. Proof that Evelyn wasn't the only one. There were others. So many others. Marcus stood behind her as the cameras rolled, the world finally learning what had been hidden in plain sight. Photos of victims flashed across screens. Documents revealed false psychiatric detentions, payments from powerful families, and adoption papers rewritten to erase biological ties. Reporters gasped as names of doctors, attorneys, and donors, people once praised for their charity, filled the airwaves. Arthur Hale's name was there, too. When the charges were read, Marcus didn't flinch. His family's wealth, reputation, and legacy, all of it disintegrated in seconds. The same newspapers that had once called him a product of the American dream now printed headlines about corruption, racism, and stolen lives. But Marcus didn't care about the image anymore. He cared about the truth Evelyn had been denied. In the days that followed, the city erupted in protest. Outside Silver Oaks, crowds gathered, holding signs that read justice for Evelyn and bring them home. People shared stories of their own, Mothers, aunts, sisters who'd vanished into care homes and never returned. The scandal had cracked something open, something larger than one man's redemption. But victory came with a price. Elaine Hale suffered a breakdown after her arrest, refusing food and slipping into silence. Arthur, stripped of his fortune and influence, awaited trial under federal custody. For Marcus, there was no joy in their downfall, only the weight of truth. He visited Evelyn daily, determined to give her back the life that had been stolen. One evening, as they sat in the courtyard of Silver Oaks, now under federal supervision, Evelyn turned to him with surprising strength. Her voice was steady. "They can't hurt us anymore," she said. It wasn't defiance, but peace. The words echoed through him. For the first time, he believed them. That night, Marcus stood alone outside the care home, looking at the city skyline that had once defined his ambition. He realized how small it looked now, how meaningless the towers of glass seemed compared to the woman who had survived decades of silence and still dared to forgive. The case was far from over. There would be trials, testimonies, and headlines. There would be backlash, powerful people desperate to bury what had been exposed. But something irreversible had happened. The illusion of purity that shielded privilege and race had cracked. The world had seen what lay beneath, and Marcus had made his choice. He would not rebuild the empire his parents left behind. He would build something different, something that made sure Evelyn's story, and those like hers, were never erased again. As he turned to leave, a single camera flash illuminated the night. Somewhere, a reporter called his name, asking if he had anything to say to the families who still denied wrongdoing. Marcus paused, the city's noise falling away behind him. "They buried the truth for 30 years, he said quietly. "Now it's their turn to live with it." He walked into the darkness, leaving behind the man he used to be, unaware that the hardest part was still to come. The trials stretched on for months, each headline pulling more secrets from the shadows. Behind every document and testimony was a story like Evelyn's. Lives uprooted, voices silenced, families fractured by a system that hid behind polished facades and legal jargon. The public wanted villains, but what emerged was something harder to confront. An entire network of privilege that had quietly thrived on racial exploitation for decades. Arthur Hale was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. Elaine Hale, declared mentally unfit for trial, was placed in psychiatric care. A bitter irony that did not escape Marcus. The same institutions that once served the powerful had now swallowed them whole. He didn't feel vindicated watching it unfold, only hollow. Justice, he realized, wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. And even when accountability came, it could never restore what was lost. Evelyn's recovery was slow but steady. Under new supervision, her medication was reduced, her memory sharpened, and her laughter returned in fragments. She started baking again. Small batches of cookies she shared with the nurses. Sometimes she'd hum to herself while stirring the batter, the same tune Marcus remembered from childhood. He visited her every week, no longer as a benefactor or a businessman, but as a son trying to make amends for years he could never reclaim. Silver Oaks was shut down and later repurchased under Marcus's name. Not to rebuild it as a clinic, but as something entirely different. Within a year, the building reopened as the Evelyn Brooks Foundation for Family Justice, a nonprofit dedicated to uncovering wrongful institutionalization and illegal adoptions. The same halls that had once silenced women now hosted family reunions, therapy sessions, and support groups. The transformation was symbolic. What was once a place of disappearance became a place of return. Marcus poured his resources into the foundation. He hired investigators, legal teams, and social workers to track similar cases nationwide. Within 2 years, the foundation had helped reunite 37 families. Some stories made the news, others stayed private. But every name recovered felt like a small act of defiance against the machinery that had erased them. The public reaction was overwhelming. The hashtag Justice for Evelyn trended for months. Protesters gathered outside corrupt clinics. Former patients came forward with their own stories, some heartbreaking, some hopeful. Universities invited Marcus to speak about ethics, privilege, and accountability. But he never played the hero. He always began the same way. This isn't about me. It's about who we choose not to see. For Evelyn, the years that followed were quieter. She lived in a small house on the foundation's grounds, cared for by a staff that treated her like family. Children visited her often. Some were those the foundation had helped reunite. She told them stories, taught them how to bake, and sometimes sat under the garden trees with Marcus, watching the sunset. In one of their last quiet evenings together, Marcus asked her if she ever hated the people who did this to her. She smiled faintly and shook her head. "Hate keeps you where they left you," she said. "Love gets you home." It was a simple sentence, but it carried the weight of everything she had endured and everything he was still learning. 3 years after the first raids, a documentary titled Buried Truths premiered on national television. It chronicled the case, Evelyn's survival, and the systemic racism that had enabled it all. The film received awards and sparked new laws tightening regulations around private adoptions and psychiatric care. But for Marcus, the greatest recognition came from something smaller: letters from people who had seen the film and decided to search for missing relatives. People who said Evelyn's story gave them the courage to demand answers. By then, Marcus had stepped away from his construction empire entirely. The skyscrapers still bore his name, but he no longer needed them. His real work was here, in the quiet space between truth and reconciliation. In interviews, he often spoke about how easy it is to hide injustice behind wealth, and how systems of racism survive not through monsters, but through people who look the other way. "Evil," he once said, "doesn't always shout. Sometimes it signs paperwork." On the foundation's 5th anniversary, Marcus stood in the courtyard where it all began. The old silver oak sign was gone. Children laughed in the garden, families embraced, and Evelyn sat beneath the shade of a tree, surrounded by people she once thought she'd never see again. Marcus looked at her, at the building that had transformed from a place of captivity into one of healing, and realized something profound. Justice wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about restoring the humanity that had been taken away. He knew there would always be more work to do. For every story uncovered, there were dozens still buried. But Evelyn's courage had started something that could not be undone. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus turned to the crowd gathered for the ceremony and spoke softly, his voice carrying through the still air. "We can't change the past," he said, "but we can decide what stays buried and what we bring back into the light." He paused, looking into the faces of those listening. The question isn't whether injustice exists, it's whether we're brave enough to see it. The crowd fell silent. In that silence, the legacy of one woman's stolen life became a movement, a reminder that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find its way home. What would you have done if you were in Marcus's place? Could you forgive the people who destroyed your family, or would you spend your life trying to make it right? Evelyn's story reminds us that sometimes the deepest wounds aren't physical. They're the ones caused by silence, by the truth we choose not to see. If the story moved you, share it so others can hear her truth, too. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for more real, powerful stories that make you think.